thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Your story is a very powerful one as someone who started family Inceptions and then the background behind that in terms of being an egg donor and a surrogate. And I wanted to share your story with our listeners as to what inspired you to become a donor and a surrogate in the past and how you built family Inceptions and then going forward as to how you obviously help people.
Sure. Long story short, I actually was a kidney donor first. And after I was a kidney donor, the cousin that I gave a kidney to lived in California, went, visited him, saw an ad for egg donation, thought it was fascinating. A year later, reached out to the agency and was like, hey, I would be interested in being a donor. And they told me that Black women didn't have fertility issues.
Okay.
So, yeah. Now, this is in 1999.
Okay.
Clearly, Dr. Google isn't what Dr. Google is today.
Right.
I'm like, oh, okay. If there's anybody that ever reaches out, let me know. So they contacted me about 10 months later. Told me there was a family that wanted to work with me. And I ended up doing my first donation, and it was actually a horrible experience.
Okay.
And so I just assumed I wasn't going to do it anymore, but God had other plans. And so fast forward a couple of years later, I decided to go on a website that it was more of a classified ad website. And so put my information on. And then within a couple of hours, I had so many emails from Black women that were looking for Black donors. And so I got to choose whom I donated to. And I ended up donating a total of 6 times, twice for the same family. And after that experience, in 2005, was like, I really feel like I need to start an agency because there was none that really specialized in working with Black women. But then I found out that I was pregnant with my youngest son. I was already working a full-time job. I was trying to finish my MBA. I already had 3 kids, married, like all the things. And I was like, maybe right now is not a good time to start a business. But I decided then to start working for a surrogacy agency, learned about surrogacy, was fascinated with that. And I was like, oh, I'm so going to do this. And then ended up being a surrogate for 3 different families. And then my first couple that I cared for actually encouraged me to start my agency. And so unbeknownst to me at the time, but I started the first agency in the state of Georgia. And then I also ended up being the first Black-owned surrogacy and egg donation agency in the country of its kind.
And that's an incredible accomplishment. And so what inspired you to break that barrier? And how do you feel that things have changed since then? So we're talking a span of 20 years. So in that 20-year span, what have you seen that can still improve? And what do you think has improved since then?
So I started the agency because there was definitely a lack and there was definitely a need. When I decided to start the agency in 2008, again, now it was surrogacy and egg donation. There was nothing in the state of Georgia. And when I decided that I even wanted to become a surrogate, I applied to different agencies outside of the state and no one even called me back, let alone picked me up. So I had to go and find my own parents again, even on the surrogacy side. So I really wanted to provide families with opportunities to be able to help them find candidates, whether it be a donor or a surrogate, and also be able to help manage that entire process. Again, I didn't know that I would have been the first Black-owned agency at the time. There were other Black-owned agencies, but they were either doing just surrogacy or just egg donation. There was nobody that was doing both. And over the years, yes, things have definitely gotten better. I think a lot more people understand surrogacy. They understand even egg donation. It's becoming more mainstream. It's becoming more spoken about. People are not shying away from it. When I first started, the mothers who were wanting to work with the surrogate used to walk around with a fake belly because they didn't want anybody to know that they were pregnant. They were working with the surrogate. So things have drastically changed in that sense. However, on the flip side, if this is an unregulated industry, the fertility care, as far as the FDA, is regulated, but the industry as a whole, whether it's an agency, whether it's a sperm bank, a donor bank, whatever the case might be, it truly is still unregulated. And that leaves, unfortunately, for some not some great guys coming into play. There are some amazing agencies, there are some amazing professionals in the space, but like anything, there's good and there's bad.
Yeah,
And I hope that the good will outweigh the bad.
of course. As an internist, and I have many women patients, I brand myself as a women's health specialist. I see women from the ages of 16 to 103, my oldest patient. And for my patients who are interested in starting a family, a lot of it, there's a lot of education that goes into play. And I'm still surprised as to how much lack of information that women have, especially women of color. And so there are often times where I have to share my own stories or other stories that I know of to give examples to women as to what their options are, where they can go, how they can educate themselves. How do you do that for your patients? And do you find that, especially for women of color, that there is a lack of information when it comes to conception and IVF and surrogacy and all of it?
I think that there is a lack of information, not just for women of color, but for, to your point, women in general, but really to society in general. Because when we were attending school, we were taught about sex education. We weren't taught about reproductive health. We weren't
Right.
taught about the things that you need to look for. We weren't taught that at 11, 12 years old, when you get your menstrual cycle, and if it's so bad that you can't go to school, or you are vomiting, or you are in such pain that you can't really move for a week while you have your menstrual cycle, that is a problem and you should probably go and get looked at. We're not taught any of those things to really be able to educate us so that once we are ready to have a family, if that's what we decide to do, that we are prepared and armed with that information. And then it is even worse for the BIPOC community because there is already a lack of information that we get. There's a lack of information, there's a lack of access, there's a lack of financial resources. And so it already is compounding on top of all of the other issues that we already have to deal with. So one of the things that I take on as I feel is a responsibility when I raised my hand and said I wanted to be into this space is educating people. And that's why we created a podcast that we're going into episode 130 at this point called Fertility Cafe. And it really is about educating the masses on not just fertility care, but reproductive health, things that they need to be aware of, questions they need to be asking. And just because you go to a doctor and the doctor tells you it's this, is it though? You have to question what the doctor is telling you, because I know you're a physician, an internist, but you're still a human being.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, you as the person who this is your body, this is how you know how it works better than anybody else. That your doctor is only going off of the information that you're feeding them. They don't know every single thing. And so it has to be where we become advocates for our own care, for our own health, and not just for our care, but for the care for our children, our grandchildren, and even those around us. Because if we don't change the narrative now, we're still going to be having these same conversations 20 years from now.
You're absolutely right. And as someone who has had kids and been pregnant, and obviously I'm a woman first before becoming a doctor, there have been times when I have questioned what my doctors have said to me. And thankfully, I've had that education to know exactly when I feel something isn't right, when to question it, what resources to go to find others that may be able to help me. But that's not available for everyone. So I try to provide that for my own patients, but obviously you can only do so much. You're not seeing them every day, but you'd be surprised. I know, actually, you know what? I take that back. I know you wouldn't be surprised because I'm sure you have seen so many different circumstances. So as someone who is in this space, who works with women and families, obviously, day in and day out. From your vantage point, what changes need to be made for better patient advocacy and experience in third-party reproduction?
So I think first and foremost, we need to do a better job in giving everybody access through insurance. There's probably, I think at this point, maybe 16 states in which fertility care is mandated through insurance. The majority of states do not. So if you are having any kind of issues, then you have to come out of pocket. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. And quite frankly, the other thing that needs to happen is the quality of care, because let's be real, the quality of care in this country has diminished drastically. So before we can even go into anything else, those two pieces right there. And I think too, one thing that I also want to point out is when people think about fertility care, they almost always assume that it's about, because they want to have a baby. This is so much more than wanting to have a baby. I had someone on my podcast who said she was 11 years old, actually ended up having endometriosis so severely that she had to have it removed in her 20s, and it attached so bad that it also attached to her pancreas, and they also had to remove that. Had nothing to do with her having a pregnancy. It had to do with her overall health, well-being, and just being able to live a normal life. And so the first thing is really insurance. The second thing is being able to give everybody the same type of access that's needed. And unfortunately, it all depends on what part of the country you're at, what your demographics look like, what the color of your skin is, which is absolutely ridiculous because we call ourselves the country of the free, but it really isn't free. It's free for the few. And though that's not even free. And I think then the other thing is that we also have our own responsibility to go and look out for information. There is no reason anymore that someone can't obtain the information that they need. Now, yes, if you are a much older generation and you didn't grow up with the internet and doing research and all of that, I understand. But you're probably most likely not in that age demographic that's looking to be able to have a child or be able to continue on with reproducing and needing third-party reproduction services. But if you are, we have at our disposal more than any other time in history the access to information. There's Google, there's AI, there's ChatGPT, there's all these other things that we now have access to. So it is also our responsibility to go and do the research. And there's so many now organizations that's in this space that are trying to get to people to educate them, especially for women of color. There's organizations called Fertility for Color Girls. There's Broken Brown Egg. There's the White Dress Project. There's Resolve. There's so many different organizations now. You can go on Instagram, look up different fertility. There's different groups that were created by women who've gone through this and are willing to share their experience. Access is now there as far as resources to be able to find out who can help you. What as a society we need to work on is being able to help people afford to be able to get those resources.
And does that vary at this point, state by state, or is it at a federal level? How does that work?
It's all state by state. It is not at a federal level, even though the current administration talked about providing IVF to everyone. That still nothing has come out of that. We're now mid-year of 2025. We still have no information on that right now, and we don't know where that stands. Unfortunately, though, IVF, or not just IVF, again, fertility care, being able to get tested, being able to be seen by a reproductive endocrinologist, for many is unobtainable. The great thing, though, is that for some, you can actually start at your OBGYN office and go to your OBGYN and ask them to run some tests and do some screenings. And it shouldn't just be because you're trying to get pregnant. It should be way ahead of time of you asking those questions. Hey, what is my AMH? What is my anti-Mullerian hormone level? just so I have a baseline at 22 of where I'm starting. Because if my levels are below 2.0, which is the levels that they're looking at, maybe I need to start thinking about why that is. Why am I so low at this age? Is it my birth control? Is there another medical issue? Is there a concern that I need to have? So we need to be, again, proactive about our own health and be able to start advocating for our health.
I don't think, though, that medicine as it is, and I'm not talking about all doctors and practitioners across the country. I'm sure that there are many who practice differently, but in general, my experience with my own patients is that when they do ask those kind of questions about checking their AMH, having a pelvic ultrasound, it's not necessarily met with enthusiasm if they're
Yes.
not actively trying to have pregnancy at that point.
Yes. And that's where advocacy for yourself comes in.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay with that doctor.
Yeah.
You can move on to another one. And if that doctor doesn't answer your questions and can't assist you, then move on to another one. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to have to live with you, not them. And if you have a problem that woman that I was telling you about, it took them 18 years to find out that she had endometriosis. And by the time they found out she had endometriosis, it was so far gone that it actually caused her to be infertile. It caused her to have major surgery that also removed her pancreas.
Yeah. Yeah, I share these kind of stories with patients, and sometimes it's heartbreaking because they didn't get the care earlier on. And as women, families are having children later, and sometimes that obviously takes a priority. And so the advanced maternal age, these kind of underlying health issues that may not have been addressed, and boom, suddenly you're not able to get pregnant. So it can be devastating and heartbreaking as well. As someone who's been an egg donor, has been a surrogate many times, how have those individual roles shaped your perspective? And I'm curious because I'm always fascinated what drives people. What was the experience? What was the inspiration? For me, it was dealing with health issues in my own family as a child and seeing that. And that's what inspired me to become a doctor. And I hold on to that. And I think that's what shapes who I am, even. What was it for you that led you into this field?
So as I started, I was a kidney donor.
Yes.
Unfortunately, 6 weeks after I gave my cousin a kidney, he passed away.
Okay.
Prior to him passing away, the week that we were in the hospital together, he obviously recovered faster than I did. He came into my room and he was holding my hand and he was like, you know what? I got to be for the first time like a man in so long. And that small little thing that people take for granted.
Right.
And we're saying granted, it's a part of what we need to do, but that small little thing gave me such a profound impact because not that day, but further on down the line, I realized how one human being can have an impact and a change in somebody's life. And that was my trajectory. Now, did I set out to start an agency and all of this? Absolutely not. They always say that you make plans and God laughs. Well, this just was my calling. This is what I am supposed to do. I do not look at this as a job. I look at this as an opportunity to be able to serve people because I have enough information now that I've gathered over all of these years. I've been in this industry now for 24 years, and I have seen so much. I have spoken to so many people. I have helped so many people, and I have so many stories. And being able to say and speak to somebody and say, oh, you know what? That sounds so-and-so. You should consider the ABC or whatever. And to be able to have that ability is something that I look at it. It's a huge responsibility to have, but it's a responsibility that I absolutely love to do because it is what I was created to do.
That's how I feel about what I do on a daily basis. And as there are challenges that we meet across the way when you question, why the hell did I do that?
All the time. And then you get a phone call and it's, oh, okay, I remember it.
Within those experiences, you've spoken in the past about feeling both visible and invisible as the only person of color in clinics. And how did that shape your mission and your values as a person of color who has been in this space? How did that shape you?
Again, when I first got into this industry professionally, it was in 2008. And the industry clearly has drastically changed over all of these years. But when I first started, I would go into conferences and there could be 200-300 people at that conference. I've been to conferences where there was probably thousands of people in the conference and look around and just be the only person of color. And it used to be where I felt very, again, unseen, seen at the same time, because you're standing out. So people are looking at you and probably, although no one had ever said anything, but probably wondering, what is she doing here? And who is she? And what is, but one thing about me is I am very comfortable in my own skin. And I'm not known to be shy to speak my voice and to speak up. And so I just made it where any place that I went, as uncomfortable I was actually feeling, I made it so that I would get myself out of my own comfort zone for them to know, you need to do better, society, industry, you need to do better. There needs to be more people of color in these spaces, because if you're talking about treating them, then you need to understand who they are. There is no way for you to understand who they are unless you are around them, unless you know them, unless you are some of them. And I'm so happy that a lot of it has drastically changed. And then there's many, not as many, of course, as others, but there are many reproductive endocrinologists that are people of color. There's other people in the industry that are people of color. But I do still feel, though, that there is a lack, if you will, in some arenas of people still not understanding the full magnitude of how you approach one population is not always the same way you can approach the next population. And so you have to be able to be willing to learn and grow and see from different perspectives in order for you to be able to connect with that other person.
We are, as women, as families, we're having kids older and older, and sometimes surrogacy becomes more realistic. When should a woman start considering surrogacy more seriously?
So it really depends.
Okay.
We've had women in their 50s who have been able to carry their own pregnancy without any problems. Granted, they probably utilized donor eggs, or maybe they had frozen eggs and they were now able to carry those frozen eggs that they've had from years past. So it's not necessarily just because you're in your 40s, you can't carry your pregnancy, but you also have to look at your overall medical health. And do you have any complications? Do you have diabetes? Do you have hypertension? Have you had cancer? Are you taking medications for that? And there's a number of reasons why someone would need to work with a surrogate. And I want to also clarify, because a lot of people, you hear surrogate and they automatically assume sometimes that the woman is carrying a pregnancy that is of her genetics, which is not necessarily the case. So there's two types of surrogacy. There's traditional surrogacy, and then there's gestational surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is when the woman is using her genetic material as well as carrying the pregnancy on behalf of someone else. gestational surrogacy, which is the most common surrogacy that is now being done really across the world, is where someone is carrying a pregnancy that has no genetic connection to her whatsoever. She is just carrying that pregnancy to give the child back to his or her parents. And for majority of families that are doing surrogacy, they do have some kind of medical issue. And that is why they're looking to work with a gestational surrogate. Now, you obviously have to be able to create embryos, and whether you create embryos because you've used your own genetic material and your partner's genetic material, or you had to use donor eggs or donor sperm, or both, or you've had to do embryo donation to be able to also work with a gestational surrogate. There's a combination of all options, but you really have to figure out what your situation is. Do I need to work with the surrogate? Because the other thing to note is the surrogacy should not be your first jump to. It should be your last resort. So you need to decide, is this something that I can do? And then if not, okay, what do I need to do in order then to be able to start creating my embryos and then to go about finding a gestational surrogate? The good thing with Family Inceptions is we can help them with all of that information. So it's not where somebody has no idea and we're telling them, you go figure it out and then come back to us when you're ready for surrogacy. We can guide them through that whole process.
Okay.
And the thing to note also about the cost of surrogacy, it's expensive. To do surrogacy now with embryo creation, especially if you don't have insurance, you're looking at easily about $175,000 to $200,000 to do surrogacy. So it is not for the faint of heart. It is very expensive. And unfortunately, it just seems to be that it's getting more and more expensive as the days go on. It's not something that you can just jump right into. This is something you have to process. It's something that you have to prepare for. And when you have to get yourself educated about, I talked about, we have Fertility Cafe, which is our educational platform, where September 27, we're actually going to be doing an educational event in Atlanta. And it's free for anybody who wants to attend that are going through fertility and reproductive care, to be able to come and get educated by doctors, by attorneys, by people who have gone through this, to learn about surrogacy, to learn about egg donation, to learn about IVF, to learn about fertility preservation. Because again, it's not just, oh, I just want to have a baby.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great that there's stuff out there that you make available to people, because it is such a daunting experience. One, frankly, that I haven't been through, but having seen other people who've gone through it, it is such a scary experience. What is next for Family Inceptions?
So we're excited. We are putting, again, these educational events. We've been doing our Fertility Cafe podcast for the last 5 years. And now that, I don't want to say COVID is behind us, because I don't know if that COVID is ever going to go away. But now that people are getting back into meeting in person, we're starting to do events across the country. They're educational events. They're not the typical conferences where you're bombarded with sales pitches and hundreds of different professionals all trying to get you to work with them. This is an educational platform where there's a physician talking to you about what is IVF and how does it work, and what are the things you need to look at, and what are the things you need to be concerned about. What are the questions you need to be asking when you're considering going to a fertility clinic? Or if you're doing fertility preservation, what does that actually look like? It's not just about, I'm going to freeze my eggs and there it is until I'm ready to use them. Half of the people who do freeze their eggs never use them. So there's so much more to think about than just, I want to freeze my eggs. Or, okay, we haven't been able to get pregnant. It's been 6 months or it's been a year. Now what do we do? It's being able to give people the information that they actually need from actual experts that do this day in and day out, instead of just going to Google and putting in something and getting 15 responses and trying to decipher for yourself, is this actually right? Or is this something somebody just put out there? So we're excited that Atlanta September 27th is going to be our first event. And again, it's free to the general public. And then next year, we'll be doing it across the country and have, I think it's 5 different states across the country that will be doing next year as well. We're busy. It's great. It's been wonderful, but it definitely is something where I feel like we as an industry need to do better in taking that baton and saying, okay, you know what, we're in this space. We need to start educating the masses on not just fertility care, but reproductive health, especially given all of the things that's going on in this country right now.
Yeah. Eloise, it's such a pleasure to speak with you. Your passion comes across so clearly that honestly, I had to do very little to interview you.
I'm a talker. Yes, I'm a talker.
There's very little that I had to do for this podcast because it's so clear that that you're so passionate about this field and that it's obviously not just this field, about your love of it and you're so eager to help people. And that's a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I just hope that for anybody listening, that they really do take to heart how advocating for yourself is just going to be the best thing that they can do. And again, not just advocating for yourself and your family. That should be the first and foremost, regardless of whether this is in your purview or not.
Yeah. No, you're right. There are times when patients come in and don't get me wrong, they're advocating for themselves, but they start off apologizing. And I say to them, never apologize for having a question, for asking for more information, at least from me. Yep. Because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help you. I think advocacy in all health spectrums is absolutely important. But in this particular area, obviously, it is absolutely a must because, there's so much to get through. Having a child is not easy.
No. And then you have them and then you still have to raise them. And there's a whole other conversation right there.
A whole different podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation. Exactly. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come and share. And like I said, we're more than willing to answer anybody's questions. Just go on our website, give us a call. And you don't have to be local.
Yes.
We work with families across the country. Actually, we work with globally as well. We can assist anyone anywhere and be able to point them in the right direction and give them the resources they need. Our website is familyinceptions.com, and the social media handles is all at Family Inceptions at Family Inceptions as well. It's pretty simple. As long as you remember Family Inceptions, you'll find us.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you. This was great.